year 801 after Christ, Al-Hakam, Emir of Cordoba, had just suffered a harsh humiliation. He had seen how the Asturian troops had traveled 600 kilometers within his domains and had looted the prosperous city of Lisbon. And as soon as they had arrived, they had returned to the other side of the Cantabrian mountain range. In addition, his informants had revealed to him that the relations between Charlemagne and Alfonso were very good and that they had probably agreed to join forces to defeat him. Let's look at the situation of the kingdom, a quick reminder of the previous video. The northeastern peninsula is in terrible shape. There are rebellions in the Pyrenees area, from Pamplona to the Mediterranean. In fact, Charlemagne had managed to establish a small Hispanic march. This means that if the Franks wanted to invade his emirate, they could cross the Pyrenees without resistance. On the Navarrese side, Muslim control had become almost non-existent, and this was taken advantage of by the Asturians and the Franks to be able to connect both kingdoms by land. This is where Al-Hakam will act, cutting the link between the two allies. In the summer of this year, the emir appointed his brother, Muawiyah, general of a powerful army that was to regain absolute control of Navarre. He gave him full powers to design his own strategy as long as he managed to fulfill his mission. Muawiyah left from Cordoba to Toledo. Once there, he resupplied and headed east towards the city of Zaragoza, which nearly fell into Frankish hands 2 decades earlier. If you want to know about this fact and the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass, I'll leave the link to the video up here. Once in Zaragoza, he resupplied again, put his men on alert, and set off northwest, following the course of the Ebro. His first objective would be to devastate the Alavesa plain, but he made the same mistake that other Muslim leaders before him made. They misjudged the Christian kingdom's abilities. Instead of taking a detour to avoid gorges, he took the path of the Conchas de Aganzon, a path full of throats. And above these were the forces of King Alfonso, and the Christians ambushed the Moors and managed to finish off most of the infidels. Those among the Muslims who managed to escape were pursued and executed by the Asturian cavalry. In the end, only Muawiyah managed to escape with a handful of loyal warriors. The general hurried back to Cordoba to deliver the news. And it would be difficult news to deliver, as what was supposed to be a revenge for the sacking of Lisbon turned into another major defeat. Finally, the man arrived at the capital of the emirate. He delivered the news, and 62 days later, he died, it seems, of shame and sadness. 2 years later, in 803, it seems that the situation in Pamplona and the Navarra area calmed down and was again controlled by the emir. So the land link between the Franks and the Asturians had been cut off. It was necessary for Al-Hakam to consolidate his dominion there and open a wedge into the interior of Asturias from the east to widen this gap. Do you remember Al-Karim? Well, the emir put him in charge of a new army and sent him with these orders to penetrate the eastern part of the kingdom of Asturias from Navarre and widen the space between the Carolingian Empire and the kingdom of Asturias, while they would take everything in their path. Al-Karim and his hordes set off, and nothing more is known. They suddenly disappear from history, just as happened, for example, with the 9th Legion. It is not known where they fought, nor the towns they passed through. This expedition is simply no longer mentioned. Most likely, as was already the case with Rome and the Visigoths, and after all, throughout history, it is. That this campaign is being erased because it was a complete failure. I see no other explanation, so we can presume that the Moorish army and Karim himself died fighting in the north. At the hands of Alfonso? I assure you, no. We'll see it in a moment now. The fact is, it was just another defeat. The Muslims have already had 3 consecutive ones in no time at all. 2 years later, in 805 AD, it was Uthman's turn, also an old glory of the emirate. Remember that he was the one who defeated Bermudo, causing him to abdicate in favor of Alfonso II. Uthman's memory of the Asturians was that they were a people who could hardly resist, so he decided to go straight for the Christians without beating around the bush as the Muslims had done successfully years ago. Well, not this time. Uthman headed north and began to go up the course of the Pisuerga. North of Palencia, the Christian hosts, probably now led by Alfonso II, confronted him and offered battle. Both forces clashed and the infidels were once again defeated without mitigation. Again, the general himself, Uthman, died fighting in battle. These expeditions are known as asifas and basically consist of looting Christian territory, killing all Catholics, and returning, although they could also take over a border city. And did only the Moors do this? Not at all. Alfonso VI had decided that he should pay them back in their own coin and launched looting attacks all along the border of his kingdom, but not only along the border. Just as the Muslims had intentions of looting further into the Christian kingdom, the Asturians wanted to do the same with the emirate. And with the memory of the Lisbon looting, Alfonso II took his lootings all the way to none other than the Tagus River. Do you remember that Alfonso Borrell launched attacks up to the Duero and created the Duero Desert? This is similar, but without depopulating the area. And do you remember that I just said that in the Mora expedition of 803, Alfonso surely wasn't leading his men? Okay, well it turns out that in the year 801, 802, there was a coup d'etat in the Kingdom of Asturias. But it was a pretty strange coup, as it's practically not documented at all. It doesn't even mention who the coup leader was, and it seems that he didn't even assume the title of king. It's as if it was a coup d'etat by someone from the court linked to an important noble family, but who recognized the legitimacy of Alfonso II to rule the Kingdom of Asturias. It's possible that it was a faction that rejected the monarch's approach to Charlemagne, or that was tired of warring with Islam. Or they had simply been bribed by Al-Hakam to stage the coup so that the emirate could take over the north. It's not known. It is known that Alfonso II was locked up in the monastery of Ablanya, and there he stayed for 2 or 3 years until a scene worthy of the legend of King Arthur took place. It turns out that a group from the king's personal guard armed themselves to the teeth and left Oviedo heading towards Ablanya. At the head of this contingent was a Hispano-Gothic nobleman who had great military power in the kingdom. His name was Teudano, and he led the faithful Reshis, that is, those faithful to the king, who we could liken to the monarch's knights. Well, they arrived, killed the guards who were preventing Alfonso from leaving his prison, broke the padlocks, and freed the king. It's likely that upon his return to the court, there was still opposition to his comeback, but the knights dealt with them and returned the king to his throne. Let's take a break from the military narrative. And let's look at the civil reconquest, the one that was led by the settlers. It turns out that this influx of settlers, this Christian immigration to Muslim lands, is getting stronger over the years. The Mena Valley is becoming populated, with the nuclei of Os de Mena and Ordejon de Mena emerging, and later the enclave of Espinosa de los Monteros will be born. Think that this whole area was constantly attacked by the Muslims, so it required a lot of courage, or you had to have a lot of confidence in the Asturian forces to leave everything behind and go to that area to start a new life. All of this is populated over the years, and they are no longer the initial Basque tribes separated from each other and without much relation to the Kingdom of Asturias. Now it's the Asturians, regardless of their origin, who are repopulating the territory. The town of Valpuesta will be of great importance, which will receive some, let's say, charters, some rights that it acquired in the lands that surround it. And the structuring part of all this colonization will be the monasteries. And speaking of monasteries, in the year 813, something will happen that will shock all of Christendom. Ladies and gentlemen, the tomb of Santiago has just been discovered. Let's remember that Santiago was one of Jesus' 12 apostles and had preached in Hispania. He later died in Jerusalem, and his remains were returned to Hispania for burial. We can take this with a grain of salt, but I'll tell you what happened at the time of the discovery and what was thought. Of course, if Santiago was an apostle of Jesus and preached in Hispania, we're talking about the first person who tried to evangelize the peninsula. Therefore, if his body was buried in the kingdom of Asturias, the Asturians not only had a land to reclaim, this if we consider, as partially did Alfonso II, that they were the heirs of the Visigothic kingdom, but they also had the legitimacy to re-evangelize the peninsula. We could say that the kingdom of Asturias could also be identified at that time as the kingdom that should return Hispania to Catholicism. The discovery spread like wildfire. The news soon reached the court of Oviedo. From there it flew to Charlemagne and soon arrived in Rome. Pope Leo III would soon confirm the discovery and endorse it as real. Alfonso, upon hearing the news, quickly went to where the tomb was, becoming the first pilgrim of Santiago. He ordered the construction of a church over his tomb, at least the first one of them. And how did Europe take it? Well, with a lot of fury. The news that the remains of the Apostle Santiago had been discovered in Finisterre, that is, in the lands of the end of the world, added even more specificity to the story. Pilgrimages soon began, and think about something. Put yourselves in the situation. You are a Christian from the beginning of the 9th century. You've heard that at the end of the known world, the tomb of an apostle who had been missing for 800 years has appeared in a land constantly assaulted by Muslims, so his remains are in danger. What would you do? Well, along with these pilgrimages, a flow of money will begin from all of Christendom to the kingdom of Asturias, either as donations to the Asturian church or simply due to the expenditure of the pilgrims and the growth of trade around the way of St. James. In addition, volunteers will arrive who offer to defend the kingdom. But, as there is still time for this, we will see it in another video.